Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jaw and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
We have two topics today that I wanted to talk about. One, Kevin Kaminsky, who is a Microsoft MVP, he wrote a blog article about some things that are coming out in Entra. So I wanted to talk about that. And then the other thing is, this is a little bit old because I had saw a Twitter post about this. There's some Facebook settings that had changed recently, and then I went and researched it. And apparently they were testing this all the way back in July of 2025. But what I wanted to do is kind of highlight this because it is a little bit concerning. So if you go, we'll talk about it, but there's some new privacy settings in Facebook that you probably want to check. And this is just more of an overall, big tech is kind of testing a lot of stuff with AI. And so we'll get into that. But let's start with Entra. And before we get started with that, since we are talking about Microsoft, let's go through our standard disclaimer before we get into it.
Andy and I both work for Microsoft in our field security sales. We're recording the show outside of work on our own time, and we self-fund the show. The opinions you're about to hear expressed are those of Adam Brewer and Andy Jaw, and do not necessarily reflect those of Microsoft Corporation.
All right. So let's get into it. So first thing is there's going to be a new change, a shift in Entra, and this is more on the enterprise side. We've talked about this shift on the consumer side, which Microsoft had done a while back, but passwordless is now going to be the default option. So consumers, this is already a thing. If you stand up a new Microsoft account, it will default you to the passwordless experience. So it won't ask you to generate a password. So right off the rip, your account won't even have a password. And for enterprise, obviously, we've talked about passwordless quite a bit, and that's going to be something that is available. But what is going to happen now, there's a setting within your authentication methods, which is in your Entra admin portal, that is called the system preferred authentication. And that's been around for a long time. But what is changing now is as of May of 2026, so just last month, it expands to first factor sign-in to the Microsoft managed state, which means that if a user has a passkey or certificate-based authentication registered, they won't ever see a password box. So the platform will present the strongest credential that they have, which it used to, a while back, it used to default to the last MFA method that you used. So even if you had a passkey or if you had certificate-based and you use, say, the TOTP or Authenticator app, it would default to that. A while back, that changed to the strongest method, but now it's going to default in that Microsoft managed state, which is let Microsoft manage it essentially setting. That's going to default to the strongest, as well as it's going to default to passwordless on top of that. So
yeah, the change is second factor versus first factor. So previously, and we discussed this on the show, second factor received this change to where the behavior changed from last successfully used to become strongest registered method. This was only with second factor though. So for example, if a user had been signing in with a password and then providing a one-time passcode through SMS text message, the behavior would be just keep prompting them for SMS. Well, you're never helping them get to a more hardened state if you do that. So a couple of years ago, the Entra team made the change to where, hey, if a user had registered a stronger method, I don't know, say Authenticator app with number matching and push notifications, it would start defaulting to that. This change is now on the first factor. So if a user has passwordless methods like a USB security key, a pass key, certificate-based auth, it will default to that first. So that's what's new this time around. It's a continuation of that previous change, but now extending instead of second factor, now extending to first factor.
And the credential ranking order from our official documentation on Microsoft is the TAP, or the temporary access pass, the passkey /FIDO2, certificate-based auth, and then it kind of goes to the next ones that aren't as passwordless. So Microsoft Authenticator, the external MFA, if you have that set up, TOTP, telephony, QR code, and then finally password. So
Dead last,
dead last.
as it should be.
So this is definitely a way to help kind of push organizations in that direction of behavioral design change. As we all know, in security, the tyranny of the default. So if there is a default method, generally that's what most people will select. And so Microsoft isn't really telling users to go set up a passkey. They're just not showing users the password field once something stronger exists. So that removes that friction removal is kind of the new security policy.
So, and no nudges to go register different factors. That's not what this is. This is only taking what the user has already registered and displaying the strongest of those registered methods. In this change, there is no user prompts or anything like that, because I think we did that previously where people who only had SMS registered did get nudged. Hey, you need to go register the Authenticator app instead, as an example. There was actually a attempt to get users to register stronger factors. That is not happening here, to be clear. This is just leveraging the strongest factor users already have in place and driving them to that and adjusting that behavior. Because again, same thing. If I've been authenticating fine with my password plus the Authenticator app, nothing is forcing me or convincing me to go start using my pass key instead, or using my FIDO2 security key, or using certificate-based auth. And now this will instead prompt that by default when I first sign in. So that's the difference here.
And the rollout should reach all Microsoft managed tenants by the end of June 2026. So if you haven't deployed passkeys or certificate-based auth, you're not like, nothing's going to be immediately broken or anything like that. Users without a stronger method registered will still get the password prompt. So not like a big rush, nothing's going to break. However, it is something that you want to start taking a look at, because if there are users that do have a passkey registered, if you've partially deployed it or you started a deployment, those users will stop seeing a password box. So a few takeaways: make sure that you go and audit your registered authentication methods. Any users that are using certificate-based authentication or a passkey, you want to notify them, and make sure that if you're not passkey or certificate-based auth ready and you want more time, you can always explicitly set the system preferred auth to enabled instead of Microsoft Manage. That Microsoft Manage is a drop-down selection in the authentication methods. And so that will limit the logic to second factor only. And it gives you some time to kind of deploy if you're haven't started or you're still in the middle of a deployment of passkeys. And then a final note is temporary access pass becomes kind of like your recovery lifeline here. If your user loses their only strong credential, tap is how you bootstrap them back. So make sure that your help desk has a way to issue a tap before the June rollout. And I'll put some documentation in the show notes if you want to get to it. We have a whole thing on how to roll out tap. This is how Microsoft does their kind of password resets, factor resets as well. So it's something that is very easy for your users to get into, and should be part of your whole recovery account standard. Okay, so the second thing that is coming is kind of a big thing if you have a bunch of different tenants. So this applies to orgs that have multiple tenants. Maybe you've done M&A, mergers and acquisitions, or you have some subsidiaries, regulated environments, or any isolated tenants. Cross-tenant synchronization was something that came out a little while ago, and that's existed for users, but now you can extend that to security groups. So your source tenant can manage group membership and target tenants can consume those memberships. So pretty cool thing. That's now GA. If you need the same group in two different tenants, instead of having to maintain duplicate groups manually, now you can do that cross synchronization with your groups along with the users that are in those groups. So the source tenant always owns the group and the target tenant always inherits those groups. And so you have that consistent control and coordination without having to manually do it. It does, correct me if I'm wrong, this is what I have in the notes here, Adam, but it requires Entra ID governance or Entra Suite in order to do this cross-tenant synchronization.
That sounds right to my ears. And if you're not familiar with this, Entra ID Governance was that new suite of IGA capabilities that went above and beyond the existing ID governance capabilities in Entra ID Plan 2. So this was a new offering. I think it was released about 2 years ago now. If you haven't explicitly paid for it and bought it, you don't have it today. And just as an awareness on how things like that are licensed, they're licensed per user for any user that benefits from the service. So, as an example here, all the users that would be in any group that is targeted for this would need a license. So, if I was targeting a group to sync that had 50 members, all 50 members need an Entra ID governance license, as an example. Also, Entra ID Governance is part of Entra Suite. Entra Suite is part of Microsoft 365 E7. So that's how the nesting dolls fit together there as well. You can buy ID Governance standalone, or you can buy it as part of Entra Suite or as part of E7.
All right. And then two other things that were worth noting in Kevin's blog here. One, sensitivity labels for security groups, Purview and Entra are now converging. And so Microsoft Entra ID supports applying Microsoft Purview sensitivity labels to cloud security groups. That's in public preview. So now the same label that can govern document classifications and an M365 group setting can be controlled in the same kind of group behavior. And so it's kind of a big deal. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is, because sensitivity labels have really been a powerful tool for information protection, especially in this new AI kind of boom. But they've operated separately from identity governance, right? It's an identity protection thing. So now that you're able to label security groups, organizations can consistently enforce a policy. So let's say, for example, a confidential label is on a document that can now correspond to a confidential label on a security group that governs access to it. So the labels become that connective tissue between data protection and access controls. So kind of the takeaway here is if you have a mature Microsoft Purview deployment already, you can pilot that sensitivity label feature now on a security group right now. You can map your existing label taxonomy to group governance policies. So if you're still building that kind of Purview information protection practice, this is kind of like a feature that might help you um, think of a better, it's like a reason that you can like use to accelerate that work, because it really unlocks that whole like unified policy model for you. So I thought that was pretty cool. And yeah, what any thoughts on that, Adam?
Definitely seen Purview sensitivity labels expanding their scope above and beyond just unstructured data sources like a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation. They have already extended to, you can assign them to a SharePoint site. You can assign them to a team in Microsoft Teams as well. So they're growing in their use case. But what's great for users is this gives them consistent naming convention, consistent taxonomy for all sorts of different examples. And they start to get a sense of what confidential means is, at least within Microsoft, it means internal only. It means only for people who work at Microsoft. And whether you're configuring a Microsoft team that way, it's only internal people. If you're configuring a security group that way, same idea. So it just helps set expectations that users kind of organically begin to understand the more they interact with it. So I just think it's a positive. The more I can reuse that work and apply that same naming convention and same kind of visual identity and same concept to more domains within the platform, I think that's a net positive for both users and administrators alike.
And then one other thing here, Azure role governance. So Azure roles have kind of been something that can be confusing for some organizations, right? Because, and I found this in supporting the federal government, where You have your M365 roles, like your global admin, exchange admin, and those are
Security reader, yeah.
security reader, security admin. Those are ones that a lot of organizations are familiar with. Once you start moving over to Azure and you have IaaS, infrastructure as a service, infrastructure in the cloud, there are separate RBAC roles within subscriptions. And so if you're familiar, we at Microsoft, we use the term subscription as an identity, an IAM construct. The word subscription is probably not the best word to use, but it does designate anything that can cost the organization money within Azure. The same construct for AWS is like the word accounts. So if you refer to if you're familiar with AWS and you know what an AWS account is, that basically equates to an Azure subscription or a GCP. I think they use projects on GCP side. It's kind of an organization construct. It has IAM rules that are bound to it, and those roles within the subscriptions have different permissions. So if you're the owner of a subscription, that means you can then grant other people reader rights, contributor rights, and these are all, again, other IAM roles that exist within the subscription. Now, for example, the owner of the tenant, like the very first GA global admin that you stand up in a tenant, they kind of have, God permissions, right? They have everything. That user has everything. But subsequent global admins don't automatically inherit owner rights to a subscription. So just because you're GA in a tenant does not mean that you have ownership rights of all the IaaS that gets deployed there. And that's for a specific reason, because sometimes you're just the permissions manager and you're not really the person who's standing up new infrastructure that'll cost more money. So that being said, there has been concerted effort to try to rein in and kind of gate the permissions, because if people have all these permissions to deploy infrastructure, then your Azure bill can spin out of control. If there's not governance around who can deploy stuff, who can read stuff, that Azure bill can spin out of control, which has happened. And so a while back, something called Privileged Identity Management, PIM, that got Azure roles that you can PIM to now. So you can assign specific subscriptions and roles to PIM to. They have PIM for groups as well. But what has now been included in this Azure role governance is entitlement management. And so that's part of Entra governance. And so your entitlement packages, where you can put that into your Entra governance and assign entitlement packages to specific groups or to specific users. Now it's, instead of having to go to, say, PIM in the Azure portal, which some organizations limit that, you can now use entitlement management packages to include these Azure roles. So it's a pretty significant step, because a lot of organizations use that entitlement management for SharePoint or Teams or other roles within M365, but now you can also include those Azure roles for management group, subscriptions, and resource group levels. So
Adds more
pretty
value
cool.
to the identity governance platform as well.
Exactly. So that is all the new things that I wanted to talk about. And then the final topic here is Meta and Facebook. Kind of a thing that I saw on Twitter, but apparently there is a setting in the camera roll that if you, and Adam, if you want to check your, I don't know if do you have Facebook?
I
Check
do,
this
unfortunately.
setting. Yeah, because I went and checked mine, and so that's why I wanted to see the users if they want to check theirs and see what they have. But the setting is under settings and then camera or camera roll sharing
Photos, got it.
suggestions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, this is in the Facebook settings?
Yeah, in the Facebook
Oh,
settings.
okay. Sorry, I was in the, there's that goofy concept in iOS where there's the settings app from Apple, and then applications can expose some settings in there. And then they usually have their own settings inside their apps as well.
Yep. So this is within the Facebook app itself, in the Facebook settings, and then it's called camera roll sharing suggestions. And there's apparently two different ones, although on my app, and I'm not sure why, I only had the one. But the camera roll sharing suggestions, there's the first one that says get camera roll suggestions when you're browsing Facebook,
Yep, see that?
which yeah, you give permissions to Facebook to access your device's camera roll to post photos and videos. They use basic metadata to make sharing suggestions from your camera roll while you're browsing Facebook. And then the second one is get creative ideas made for you by allowing camera roll cloud processing. Do you have that one on there, Adam?
I do. Yep.
Oh, you do.
Mhm.
Okay. I don't have that setting in mind, but that's the really big one. So you can basically allow Meta to get personalized creative ideas like travel highlights and collages by allowing Meta to select media from your camera roll and upload it to their cloud on an ongoing basis. So yeah, that to me, I don't particularly like. I mean, I don't like Facebook in general, but that to me is a setting that I think most people would want to turn off. So, anyways, I saw that, and actually, like, I went and researched it, and they've been testing this feature since like July of 2025. The blog that I found was Proton, which is the parent company for Proton Mail. They're obviously huge on privacy. They wrote a blog in September, but I don't know why this just came about on my Twitter feed. But someone had posted this, and on May 30th of 2026, and so I just happened to run across that, and I went and checked my settings. I didn't have that second one. Sounds like you do, Adam. Did you
I
have
do.
those turned off?
They are now off.
Okay. As you can see, they're turned on by default.
Yes,
right?
they are. Yep.
That to me, again, we talked about tiering to default in the beginning here, but to have that just turned on by default and allow Meta to process your camera roll. And I don't know about you, but like my Instagram, my Facebook, I actually don't allow them to have the entire camera roll at the same time. I select pictures.
And that's on the iOS side, right? Where iOS doesn't allow the app to scrape the entire photo library. As an example, you can restrict that now. They added that within the last couple of iOS versions to where the default behavior now iOS tries to get you to do not allow full access to your photo library, allow just the photo you want to share in that moment. So the app can't do exactly what Facebook's doing, which is scrape your whole photo library.
Yep. And in fact, like iOS will pop up a warning every now and then if you do have your whole library exposed to some app. Be like, hey, I noticed you have your whole library, given to Facebook or whatever. Is that what you really want? So that's kind of nice because it reviews it. And I think most people probably just for ease of, posting stuff, just let the app have the whole thing.
It is a hassle. Like I have that very much enabled for Microsoft Teams. And it's not so much I'm concerned about Microsoft scraping my data. It's I want to be, if I ever upload a picture to Teams, I want to be very careful about what I upload. I want to be very prescriptive about that. And so I like having the double opt in there. It's just that's good practice for, my putting food on my family's table. Just like to be confident. So
Yeah. And so like I think most people have their whole photo library exposed just for ease, and then you have these things turned on by default that allows Meta to scrape the metadata, no pun intended, and even process it in the cloud to like come up with different things. And I'm sure they're using it to train their AI because you're not getting charged for Facebook, so it's that's probably something that they're doing.
you are the product, as we say.
Yes, exactly. So, anyways, I will post the blog, and then you can go and check those settings. Again, it's in the Facebook app under camera roll. Was it camera roll sharing suggestions?
Mhm.
And for some reason, I don't know. I didn't have the second one, but you do, Adam. The first one for me was also checked off, and I went ahead and disabled that as well. But there are two settings for some people. I think for most, but anyways.
They're doing A/B testing, no doubt. I like that in the rundown, listeners, Andy has written here why this matters beyond a Facebook bad, because it is kind of one of those grass still green, sky still blue. Meta is not exactly privacy centric company. So what's the story here? And you talk about in the rundown, Andy, how literally anything in your camera roll, whether that's people use that for all sorts of things. They may take a picture of their insurance card or a financial statement, or obviously deeply personal information or deeply personal photographs that they don't want broadly shared. And these companies don't always do a good job of explaining what they're doing or what they're opting you into. Just because a user who doesn't understand has consented to something doesn't mean they truly consented, right? Like in any other concept of giving consent, you can't give consent if you don't understand what you're consenting to. But companies like Meta oftentimes say, oh, well, they consented, they said it was okay, and it's they didn't understand what they were consenting to. And I think that is pretty unethical, if nothing else.
Yeah, good call out there. Yeah, so go ahead and check. This is obviously more of a personal privacy thing. So, but I've been known to be a little tinfoil hat
Well, and
person.
you also have in the rundown here, Andy, some for our listeners who are maybe small, medium, or enterprise security practitioners. How does this affect you? Obviously, there's the personal angle that we as security professionals don't like things that are anti privacy by any means. And Meta generally rises to the top of the list there. But there is an angle here where your organization, maybe you issue a phone to someone and when or you allow them to enroll their personally owned device. But of course, it's an expectation they're probably going to take pictures of stuff and it's going to be in their camera roll. Now you have that risk on everything they take a picture of could be getting uploaded to Meta, could be getting uploaded to Facebook without your organizational knowledge. It's just another form of data leakage. And it's a risk inherent with BYOD. And for the most part, that was probably already happening. If they have an Android phone, it was getting uploaded to Google Photos. If they have an Apple phone, it's getting uploaded probably to iCloud Photo Library. So but it's again, like Apple's pretty privacy centric, right? That's kind of a differentiator for them. Meta, maybe not so much. So there is an angle there. Is there something you can do to fix this without it being super draconian? Probably not, if we're being candid. It's more just being aware of the risk. And it's not even really a new risk. Apps have always been able to request access to the photos library and do creepy stuff with it. And many apps have. But now this is just a very blatant example of it. And so it is a good reminder, a refresher to go back to when we allow people to enroll their BYOD devices, there's kind of that implicit concept of, well, it's okay if you take photos with it if you need to, take a photo for an expense account or take a photo of a whiteboard or a slide. Make sure you don't broadly share that, of course, but we kind of accept the risk that that's going to get uploaded to Apple and Google. We also probably need to accept the risk then that that's going to get uploaded to Meta as well. And, we can educate users and ask them to turn this off. Most of them won't. It's just the security team being paranoid again, putting on their tinfoil hat. What else is new? But there are some users who will respect this and will make that change. So it is potentially worth communicating to your user base.
Yeah. I don't know about you. I'm just kind of curious, but maybe this is the OCD part of my brain. When I take pictures of stuff that I don't know, whatever it is, if it's not something that I mean to, like you take a picture of like a whiteboard or something like that, or you take a picture of a document that you want to send, right? To me, that's not value added to my photo library that I want to keep. Like if I think like photo album, like I'm a little old school, right? So I grew up with actual physical pictures. So if I took a picture of something that is not value added that I want to look at later and be like, oh yeah, this was a great memory, right? I delete that just like I would going through my photo, like back when you used to take pictures to get published, and like get them
You
from
curate
Walgreens
it.
or whatever. Like I would go through and be like, oh, this is good. This is good. This one's not good. I just throw it away. Right. You never
Yep.
even take it out.
Yep.
So when I take pictures of stuff in my phone, as soon as I'm done with whatever that thing is, like if it's a document I need to send to you, I delete it from my camera roll right away.
I think you're in a minority on that by a wide margin, but I don't
Yeah,
know.
I
People
know.
do all sorts of wacky things with their photos because you still hear of people who don't have any sort of cloud sync turned on and they drop their phone in the toilet and they lose all their pictures. And to me, that's
That's true.
unfathomable, but it happens all the time. And as a to do for listeners, you do have on here, you explain where the setting is on the Facebook app. But we just talked about the other thing is Meta will do something else in the future. And the Metas and Googles of the world will keep looking for ways to siphon your data and use it for their own purposes. The real solution here is to be very vigilant about your sharing settings on the operating system side. Like we just talked about, the iOS photo sharing, contact sharing settings now allow you to be more limited in what you share. And especially for organizations that do not have a good reputation on being good stewards of your data, you should be very vigilant about only availing yourself of those limited models, those limited sharing models. And, good on Apple. And I assume Google has parity in Android. I don't know for a fact, but I would assume a good on them for building that in at the operating system level. Because that's the thing is, if Meta dreams up the next feature to siphon your photo library, if you've restricted access, they can't. The operating system won't allow it. And so those are obviously good practices too, is leverage operating system level settings whenever possible. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. Our audience knows this stuff. It's worth reminding them, and it's worth sharing the gospel with those who are important to you.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching and listening. As always, our contact information along with the links to the stories that we use for the show will be in the show notes. If you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future, just email us. Thanks, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.